In this video today, I'll teach you how to determine a range of holes to defend against when your opponent has the ball on the 3-bar. And once you have that range, I'm going to show you how to use that information to build a simple way to think about improving your defense by making sure you're covering the holes in that range. So the first big concept we want to discuss is the player's range that you're defending. So your opponent is on the 3-bar, they're probably shooting either a pull or a roller, and their skill level is going to vary wildly from like a beginner all the way up to, a Tony Spreedman, Ryan Moore, Pro Master level. And all those different types of players and everywhere in between will have a slightly different range of holes that they are willing to hit, are able to hit. And if you think about it a little bit and what this player's range might be, it gives you a good idea of the amount of goal that you need to block, and basically where are the positions that you're going to want to block. To give you a visual guide on the table, I cut out these strips of paper. They're like 1 inch wide, which is the same as a ball. So we'll basically place these on the table to give you an estimate of where your opponent might be shooting in these different scenarios. So first example would be a Pro Master shooting a rollover. You can see these, when people think about shooting a 3-bar shot, typically they will divide the goal into 3 holes. For a roller, it's the middle, and then the push, and then the pull. For a pull shot, you're gonna have a straight, a middle, and a long. And, if you're a top player, like a Pro Master level player, shooting a rollover, it stands to reason that you can probably hit, if you needed to do it, you could probably hit dead bar both ways. So if you look at the 2-bar and you kind of bring it across, this is what they call a dead bar, right? Or a dead row. And basically, because you run out of man, and basically you're dead, right? It just runs out of man trying to chase the ball over there if you go around. So you can see like a dead bar shot would be, right about just before that last dot, right straight down the line. Same thing on the other side. If you pull the 2-bar all the way across to the wall, you kind of see the same thing on the other side. If you hit basically perfect dead down the line, you can also hit that. And then of course, there's the middle. So for a Pro Master player, if you're just giving them 3 holes that they're gonna shoot, this is gonna be kind of where you would start thinking about it. In reality, they're probably not going to try to go dead bar all the time. So it's probably, I would think it's going to be their real shooting will probably be a little bit more like this, which would be like a little bit safer and just a little bit easier to hit the hole and still go long without having to go super long. Assuming they can read your D pretty good. But that's kind of where we're at, right? For a top Pro Master player shooting a rollover, the range is going to kind of look something like this, somewhere in this area, maybe. Okay, maybe at its widest, it looks like this. At its narrowest, maybe it looks like this, something like that. That's kind of where a Pro Master is. You're going to start out when you think about what part of the goal do I have to cover. And basically it's the whole goal, right? And specifically, the parts of the goal that you're going to have to defend less are actually in these kind of middle zones, most likely. People can hit these holes, but I would start out thinking of it more as that, the typical rollover shooter is gonna shoot a middle and they're gonna shoot 2 longs. And a lot of the times, they're gonna like one of the longs better than the other one. Let's look at the same example. Again, we're talking like Pro Master, top pro level players, right? What are they going to hit? They can hit a straight, they can hit the middle, or they can hit a long. I think for Pro Master players, they're going to be able to hit they could hit along and square it off like this. Some of them might spray it a little bit, so it might look a little bit more like this. But you know, that's kind of what you're looking at. And obviously it's not a stretch to imagine that people can hit these other holes in the middle. But if we're just thinking of a starting position for defense, I would like to think of it, and you had to pick 3 holes, I would like to think of it in this type of way. So if the person sprays the ball a little bit more, maybe it looks a little bit more like this. You know, if they square it off, maybe it looks like this, but it's the same general principle. It's very spread out. You're gonna have to defend the entire goal. Now let's think about like a lower ranked player, like an amateur, maybe like a low expert player. Let's say like okay, so for another case, let's think about on the other end of the spectrum, a total beginner. You know, somebody that's just started playing foosball, maybe they just start coming out to a couple tournaments. They're mostly playing goalie. They're really not a very good forward, okay? The amount of shots that they can hit are gonna be much different than a pro master. So I think this is a good example to look at because it's kind of an extreme example. So let's say you're a beginner shooting a pull shot. Let's get these lined up first. If you have somebody who's not very experienced at shooting a pull shot, their range of shots might look more like this, where they can shoot a straight. You know, that's a somewhat easy one to execute on, at least if you think about shooting it. You know, their long won't be anywhere near as long as like a pro master might shoot, right? So most likely, you know, it's probably gonna spray. So that'll be angled, and by spray I mean it's gonna be, they're not gonna square it off and makes this nice right angle. So the ball just goes straight. It's probably gonna most likely hit the ball and it's gonna spray a little bit. So you can expect a little bit of a spray, and you know, somewhere in this general range. You know, maybe if they can hit, you know, they're learning it just now, I'd put them somewhere in that range, you know, around middle dot maybe. And maybe they shoot a middle in there, maybe they don't, you know what I mean? But overall, this is the type of area that you would have to cover for like a beginner pull shooter. Somebody that's just starting out, can't hit a great long. And what you can see about this right away, if you just look at the lines, is you can cover a lot of what this person can hit with like a stationary D. So like, check this out. Okay, if you just put your min like this, it kind of takes away all their holes, right? Here, you know, ideally you're gonna be able to chip part of it away with this. So you're blocking the straight with this man, and this guy's kind of pulling off double duty where he can, you know, chip off some of the side here and also kind of get the long over here. So you could kind of just do a defense like this, and on a player with that kind of you know, with that type of a range, that could actually be very effective, and it's also pretty easy. You know what I mean? So you can kind of just stay real tight on this. And this is the type of defense that I would give beginners a lot, is I might just be kind of tight. See, like if you look at this is maybe another way to look at it, where the front man is covering some of these short holes. This back guy is covering, you know, the long and some spray from like a second, you know, a shorter kind of spray, this type of thing for a less experienced player. With a tighter range, you could kind of D up in that area. Let's talk about roller. So let's say a roller from, you know, like a rookie player that's just learning it. They can shoot it, but they're not great at it. What's that roller gonna look like? One possibility is it's gonna look something like this. So if you have a beginner roller shooter, you know, it's possible that their shot could look something like this. You know, they can hit a straight, they can hit one long decent, but maybe they spray it a little bit, and maybe it doesn't go all the way along. So maybe it's either, you know, like from pro master perspective, what would they do? They'd burn it right down the line. one of these newer players, it's going to be dramatically inside that, right? So probably more in this range, you know. And then a lot of the times, less experienced players will have one good side and one bad side that they're just not as good at executing. And they might not be good at executing it because they'll hit it short. So like if this is like the push side for this player, you know, they're hitting it significantly shorter. It's definitely not like a long like you would want to see. They're hitting it more shallow like this. That's one possibility. Another possibility is really this. And what I mean by this is sometimes a person literally won't be able to execute on a certain hole. I think this is more true of the roller for sure. Like sometimes somebody will just lose a side. They won't be able to hit it. And effectively, this is what you need to block. These are the only holes they're able to block at the moment. So you just, you know, you can kind of just stay pretty camped over there. And sometimes that can be a legit strategy. You know, maybe somebody's fake over here and fake back, but essentially, if a person is having a really hard time hitting a push side, this is effectively what his range is going to be. You know, it's going to be that middle, you know, and if he's, you know, hits a really good pull side, maybe it's a little bit deeper. If he doesn't, maybe it's in here. But if somebody's having a hard time executing on one side of it, you know, you can, from a range perspective, you can just kind of count it out. You know, and what you know, what a lot of people teaching you how to play goalie will say is that's kind of making them prove it, right? Or making them hit that hole. That is, you know, that's essentially what we're doing. We're narrowing down the range that we care to block to these two holes. And from that point, we can let him, you know, if he wants to shoot it, go for it. We're not going to really do anything to defend it. Obviously, you know, if the person's moving the ball around, you're going to need to, you know, follow the ball. You know, if they're, I'm basically just only talking about if someone's doing a set shot. This is what this advice is for. But I'd say, like, let's talk about your average player you're going to see in a tournament. They're able to do the shots. You know, they're either shooting a pull or roller. They're able to execute on them, and it, you know, with some level of success. Most of the things you're going to need to think about from a range perspective are, you know, first of all, is the person even shooting middle very often? You know, a lot of times roller shooters won't really even think about shooting middle as much, especially if they have good longs. So that's just something to be something to be aware of. Is you shouldn't be scared to leave that middle available, you know, because sometimes people on the other side really aren't even thinking about it. But with a roller, you pretty much would need to know is if you know a person can hit both sides, obviously they can hit a middle if they choose to shoot it. Then it's just a question of where do we think on average they're going to execute their two longs at. Is it going to be really deep? You know, like this, like pro master level deep, where they're just shooting it right down the line. You know, I think a more normal, like a good shot might be, you know, not quite dead bar, but basically, you know, getting around to the edge of this circle, you know, so inside a little bit. I think you'll have a lot of people who are kind of hitting more in this area. You know, I think a lot of the lower ranked players, the expert players, you know, while sometimes they will burn one way out there, a lot of the times they are hitting them, you know, further in. And it kind of just depends on who you're playing. And this is really a big part of paying attention when you're playing goalie. And also, you know, if you want to use it, you can also scout players, you know, basically watch their matches and just kind of see, you know, watch their defense or watch their shot when they're shooting to determine, like, what holes do they like to shoot, that type of thing. But out of all of this, what we're trying to say is when somebody has it on the 3-bar, you're trying to think of it in this way where you come up with, I think the range in general that I'm blocking for this player is going to be, for this case, I think it's going to be just kind of a standard roller, not going super far out to either post, okay? And I think like this is a really good way to think about it for most roller shooters. And for pull, it actually looks pretty similar because you're going to have a straight, you're going to have a middle, and you're going to have a long. The thing that's interesting with the pull shooters, I think, is that the long is really can depend. Some people could have a hard time hitting a long, in which case, it could just be a lot shorter. Some people spray it more than others. So some people go really long and cut it in for that long. Other people will kind of spray it from the middle dot, which can be like a very fast option. So you kind of have to see what people are shooting and what holes they like. In general though, I think if you're just thinking about a typical pull shooter, the way I would think about it is I would kind of block with this type of defense in mind. There's obviously the straight is there. Start out thinking that they're probably going to be shooting middles right down the middle. And then for me, a lot of times I will expect that the long won't be super long, so you want to make them, you want to be able to block a long that's like this 3/4 type of long, but you don't necessarily need to be out there blocking that end of the, down the paint, dead bar long. You don't need to be out there for an average player, so anytime you're spent out there is wasted. Okay, so next topic is, so we've discussed, depending on who your opponent is, you want to determine this expected range of shots that they might shoot on you. And this is kind of what we have here. Let's say we have this for just kind of like an average roller shooter, 2 longs that aren't super long and a middle. So when we start thinking about how do we go about defending this, there's a couple things we want to keep in mind. We want to basically, we can only block 2 holes at once, right? So you can block, these 2. This is kind of the combinations you have, right? If you want to block 2, you can block these 2, whatever. I was about to try to go through the permutations, but who cares? It's basically gonna look like this, or, and you can obviously switch as well, although that can be problematic. But you're gonna want to spend most of your time in these areas where you're basically blocking where you think somebody might shoot based on that range. So okay, let's walk through. So we have this kind of standard, let's say roller defense. Let's just walk through what are all the different configurations that we can put our min in to block these 3 holes. If you have your min in this kind of position, it's called like a standard defense, versus if I was to take the 2-bar and switch it, now we're in a reverse defense. But you can, block the middle and the pull with these two in a standard defense. You could block the middle with the back man front with the 2-bar, or you could split them, and basically now you're just guarding both longs. You could also bring in the other 2-bar and do a similar thing, where now the 2-bar is blocking the pull side, goalie man's blocking the middle. You can move like this. We can split here as well, blocking both the longs. And those are basically the different types of configurations you can use. as far as the position of your man, you don't necessarily need to be like dead center in the exact same spot every time. And I think it can be problematic for you if you are, because somebody can get a kind of good idea of that and start shooting these inside holes. So I feel like it is kind of good to bounce around a little bit in these areas. So you're not just like dead stopped. But at the same time, I think you can be successful by basically being dead stopped and just moving around quickly to these different configurations. And you'll see some pro guys like Ryan Moore and Bobby Diaz basically like leave their min stationary for an extended period of time, and it kind of can freak the other person out. I know there's some history there, but as far as the ranges go, what these guys are doing is they're taking one of their men, putting it in a favorable position, and just leaving it there. That's kind of the key to a good defense, is making sure you're maximizing the time in these favorable positions. So if you look at this type of range, where would I want to put like either the 2-bar or the 3-bar? I would think, for me, I would want to guard on the, if this is the kind of path of the ball, I'd want to guard kind of on the inside of this, of where I expect them to be. Because, on the longer side of it, it's going to chip off, hit this side of the man and bounce off. If they hit it shorter, I'm leveraging more of the man by having more of the man inside on the table. Same thing with the 2-bar. You could guard way out here, but do you have to? You know what I mean? Can you effectively block that same hole by scooting in? You can see we're still overlapping with the range, but now we're in closer. So if you can do that, that's really beneficial, because you get a little bit more coverage here in case they do shoot a middle and it just happens to go a little bit long. Maybe they hit a middle and now it hits your man accidentally. If you're in this far, there's just a lot of benefits to not going all the way out to the side. And if you think about it, the ball is an inch wide. If you move your man to the edge of the goal, just overlapping this path of the ball, if you get to the edge, that's like a dead bar shot already. Most people aren't going to be hitting that right out of the gate, so you really don't need to have your man right there. So you could even, scoot it in just a little bit. And if you think about it, when somebody's shooting like a reasonably long shot, not super long, this does kind of match up, because that does sort of match up with just like you're blocking a lot of this shot still, but you are blocking some more middle. So it just helps to stay a little bit more, you don't want to leave a huge long, but you want to start out kind of making people prove it. And then as time goes on, you're going to kind of change your range and what you think people can hit. So let's talk about like your range evolving through a shot. So let's say this is kind of what you think the player you're shooting is going to shoot. Just basically like not very good pull side long, decent push side, and you're kind of going to rotate between these. And you set up your D like this. He shoots a pull side, goes around you, and it goes in. Now what you have to kind of think is, was that like a lucky shot, or do I want to give him credit for it? And I think most of the time what you're going to want to do is if you're in if somebody scores on you, you basically want to ask yourself first, was I in a good position with both my men at the time? And what are all the good positions on with this type of expected range? One would be like right here, or maybe just off of it a little bit, something like that. You wouldn't want to be on this side of it, because you're too close to the side of the goal, right? So you're gonna want to basically be like right on this line, or maybe a little bit, you can cheat a little bit in towards the middle, just that kind of area, right?
that's a reasonable spot. Same thing with the 2-bar, you know, it's the same exact thing, but on the 2-bar side. You could have them all the way out there, you could have it in a little bit. That's kind of a good starting spot. On the middle, you know, this is kind of up to you. You can kind of be right on the middle, you can kind of float to one side, you can float to the other side. You know, sometimes if you are, let's say we're blocking, the opponent has a pretty good pull side, and we want to block the pull side. Then to kind of give us some additional cover on the push side, we might want to block the middle on the push half of the middle, okay? And this is definitely something I've heard from pro players for sure, is, you know, kind of covering half of that middle. But if you think about it from a range perspective, you want to basically touch the range with part of your man, you know, as much as possible, right? So you want to kind of limit time where there's you know, a couple things that are really bad. One is like switching, right? If you're in the middle of a switch, you know, you're basically canceling a man out. So anytime you're switching, you really want to do it quickly, and ideally you just don't want to switch a whole lot. I think it's not the best idea to do a lot of switching. But yeah, but getting back to the ranges that we're covering with each man. So if you think about, you know, guarding with your goalie man in this position, if this is the expected range you're thinking, you're basically going to want to be right on that line, maybe a little bit inside that line. Like that's a pretty good spot to be in. 2-bar, same situation, just on the 2-bar side of it. You know, you kind of want to be on that line, maybe inside a little bit, and it's kind of floating around. That's a pretty good spot to have a man hanging out. In the middle, same thing. You can have somebody right in the middle. You can kind of be a little bit more on the pull side. You can be a little bit more on the push side. You know, same thing with 2-bar. You could have it, you know, right dead in front of right in the middle of that range, a little bit to the one side of the range, a little bit to the other side of the range. And then in this case, for this push side, yeah, you'd want to either be all the way out on it or maybe in a little bit. But the thing to think about with these ranges is you want to have your men in one of those type of positions the vast majority of the time that they have the ball on their 3-bar. So you're going to want to have them in covering those ranges at all time. So I think what that means is transitioning in between these points. So when your opponent's shooting, you want to maximize the time your men spend in these range positions, right? So just here's an example defense for your start right now. You know, grab the pull side in the middle. Maybe I'll cut back and forth between the push and the middle. Now I'm just on the other side. Now open up that middle, take it away, bounce back and forth. You know, that's a reasonable defense for this type of range. You know, some things to keep in mind as well. You want to make sure you have enough space between the men. You definitely never want to come closer than this inch between the men, because a ball can't even fit through here. So let's say you have your men over, you know, not overlapping, but close to overlapping. You're wasting a lot of your men's real estate by having them that close. You really never have to have them closer than this, like a ball width. And realistically, I think, you know, you can probably have them spread out more of the time. So if you think about it in the context of these ranges, what you want to do with that is, let's say we're going to block the pull side and the middle on this type of range. Okay, so I'll get my 2-bar, I'm going to kind of float in this position, right? If I'm going to block the middle, where do I want this middle man? I don't necessarily want him on this side of the range, right? Because now we have this overlap. So if I'm going to block a pull side with a 2-bar, I'm going to probably lean on either, you know, just staying right in the middle, or, you know, a little bit on the push side, somewhere in this type of range. And those will be the 2 holes that I'll block at that particular moment. But, you know, just keeping sure to not move this guy onto this side of the range, because if I do that, now we have this overlap problem. Now that you've learned how to determine a range of holes to defend against,
from your opponent, how do we turn that into an actual defense that we'll use during a foosball tournament? I think it's pretty simple. The range is going to give you basically 3 different paths that you're going to expect the ball is going to travel along. Those are one of the, your opponent's going to try to hit one of those 3 holes. So what does that mean for you on defense? What that means is you want to make sure that each one of your men in the back is, as much as you can, covering one of those holes at all times. And you're basically just going to want to move between different holes throughout your defense. I'm not going to get into too many details on how you move your defense or baiting for holes or any of that type of stuff. I want you to think about it in a much simpler way, which is I'm just going to focus on making sure my men are covering the ranges that I expect as much of the time as possible. So that's step 1. Just always make sure that your goalie rod is in one of the 3 holes, right? For your range, whether it's, if they're shooting a pull shot, you're either going to be on the straight, you're going to be on the middle, or you're going to be on the long. And the exact positioning is dependent on those ranges, of course. And then once you have a position for your back rod man, you put your front man in another position. So you're going to cover one of the other holes. Obviously, you're not going to both cover the same hole. That makes no sense. So you're going to want to either cover the middle or the straight. So with your goalie rod in this position, these are basically the other 2 positions. And the exact position of that depends on the range that we've talked about. So throughout the course, and I think there's a couple. So one thing is make sure you always have each man covering one of those 3 holes. That's kind of guideline number 1. Guideline number 2 is if you're covering the hole next to each other, so you're like this or like this, or you're reversed and it's like this or like this, where it always has the 2 holes are directly next to each other. Make sure you're not crowding them too much, right? Because the thing is, if you're on the inside edge of the long kind of range, if you're on the kind of inside edge of that, and you're also on the pull side edge of the middle, you could wind up in a situation like this, where technically this man is on the long range and this man is on the middle range, but they're really close. So you're kind of wasting a lot of the efficiency here by, you don't need this. The ball can't fit through this at all. This can definitely be bigger. So I think the key that I want to get across to you is when you're in one of these situations where it's like this or like this, where you're guarding holes that are right next to each other, make sure that one good way to kind of make a more efficient use of your men is to kind of cover those holes, but spread them out. So in this case, let's say I'm guarding the push side and I'm going to guard the middle. So I'll guard the push side in a normal spot. The middle, I'm not going to guard it on the on the push side as well, because the push is already right here, and we're going to have the men kind of stacked. So you can have it in the middle, or maybe even a little bit on the pull side. So that's as far as a snapshot in time, this is another reasonable snapshot in time for I'm going to guard the push and I'm going to guard the middle, and I'm going to make efficient use of my men by making sure they're spread out enough. Because the kiss of death for a lot of especially the less experienced players that I see is they stack their men way too much. And that I formation is just it's really bad. Sometimes it's hard to tell you're doing it, so you really have to make a conscious effort to separate those men out. Another thing about when you're guarding these holes, sometimes it's uncomfortable for newer players to just leave a really big middle, but you have to do it sometimes. I'm not saying do it all the time, and if someone's lighting you up with middles, of course cover up that middle. What I'm saying though is, especially with roller shooters, a lot of the time if you play against a decent amateur or expert roller shooter, they're gonna just be hitting posts. They're already thinking post, they're able to hit the post, they're gonna hit posts. So in that case, like, you know, spending more of your time in this sort of configuration is not bad, because a lot of times, like, they're just not going to shoot the middle. They just kind of have a post in mind. They're going to wait and they're going to hit it, or they're just, you know, they're just going to blindly hit along. So with roller shooters specifically, you know, make sure you play around with leaving more middles. So far, what we've talked about is making sure you're on 2 of the 3 holes at all time. You know, it can be somewhere in that range, right? It's like a could be a little bit deeper, could be a little bit more in, but you want to make sure you're on 2 out of those 3 holes at all times. You don't want your man to be too close if you're guarding 2 holes that are right next to each other. Another thing, just a quick note, switching. If you're gonna switch, do it very fast, because when you're in a switch, you obviously get to this I formation point. So I think if you just never switch, that's a fine strategy. That you can totally do that and be successful. If you wanna switch, just pop, you know, like pop switch, do it very fast. The only other thing I would say is you're gonna wanna move in between these holes quickly. I think if you watch good players play defense, the very best players are moving fast, right? So to me, it's just a really good rule of thumb to move fast in your defense. And anytime that I have really worked hard to just aggressively move very fast, I've had better results personally. I think it makes the opponent feel like they have to ramp up their shot and hit it a lot faster. So there's just, you know, it's harder for them to read the holes because you're moving so quickly. You know, it just makes it a lot harder to determine what hole's gonna be open at any time. I'm not saying just like move around insane. Like, actually, this is a good example. Like, let's just look at this defense. Like, oh, I'm moving fast, I'm doing great, right? The reason that is not great is because you're not spending time in any of those holes. You're really moving around. So you're really spending a lot of time like in the middle kind of dead holes, right? But what I think you can do is you want to be in these key positions based on the range, but you want to move very quickly between those positions and quickly and abruptly move between those positions. But at other times, you'll also want to sit in those positions. And that's a really money thing to do, is just sit in a hole that you know your opponent likes to hit. Just take it away from him. I'm not saying do it for 5 seconds straight, and I think you'll probably want to like wiggle your man a little bit and kind of give the illusion that you're going to move. You know, like one thing you can do is, let's say you're sitting on the pole side here, and you know, you can just sit there like this, or you know, you can kind of wiggle around and do this type of thing, and you know, or just like kind of change the orientation of the man a little bit every once in a while, and it gives the illusion like that man is moving. So like if your opponent is like, I'm gonna hit pole side, what they might be doing is just straight up staring at this man, and then when it moves, they're just gonna go for it. So one good way to trick somebody on that is to kind of sit there and look like it's not moving. You know, you're doing this, then you kind of, then you make a motion with it like, oh, it's moving, but it's actually not moving because you didn't move the rod laterally, you just kind of did a flicking motion. So yeah, that's about it for today. Not a lot of in-depth strategy, but I think what I really want, especially all the newer players and really old timers as well, they're still at the like rookie and amateur level, is playing good defense really has to do with making effective use of the like real estate that these guys are blocking, you know? So they have to be in those sweet spots that you think your opponent's gonna shoot based on the defensive range that we've talked about. And you really need to maximize the amount of time you're in those holes, and then to confuse your opponent, you're gonna move in between those holes quickly, and sometimes also just sit in those holes. Best of luck to you. Please post, I hope you like this video. Nathan, thanks for doing some editing on this, buddy. I really appreciate it. If you guys have any comments, please post comments and questions. Like I said, this is kind of an intro defense video, so obviously there's a ton more to cover, but I think this is just a good starting point for us to start talking about defensive strategy. So let me know what you think. Post any comments. If there's any other topics you'd like to see videos made about, please post a comment about that as well. I'd like to make some more of these, and it would be cool if they help you get better, because that makes me happy, and it makes us both kick some ass at tournaments, which is badass. So anyway, thanks again. Mark Made, 5 Bar of Doom here, and I appreciate you watching my video. Please like my page, and take it easy.